Well, hi, everyone. I'm Ben Brooks. I'm the founder and CEO of Pilot. We're going to welcome everyone. I know this is a live stream, which of course means that people are coming live from meetings and lunch and commutes, or if you're just waking up or going to bed based on where in the world you are. We're going to give everybody a little grace. In just a second, I'll get started with some of our main questions. But again, we're going to talk today about what is the actual employee experience. Employee experience being one of the hottest topics around, one of the biggest buzzwords in HR, one of the most searched terms on social media related to HR, but yet there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding. I'm excited to answer your questions. We've got a lot of great questions submitted in advance. We're going to get your questions in the comments live as well. So feel free to put in comments as well. We're happy to grab those or questions you may have along the way. Thrilled to have this sponsored by ADP. ADP, if you don't know, actually 1 in 6 people in the United States gets their paycheck from ADP. They're a huge corporation that touches a lot of people, does great work. We're pleased that they're sponsoring this work and really helping to really invest in the future of work and HR. And then Human Resources Executive Magazine, which I've had a long-term relationship with. I write a coaches column corner every month, so check that out about advice for HR people. Too often HR is the shoemaker's children that has no shoes. I'm a real big believer that everyone succeeds at work, including HR and your careers. So check out that there. So again, welcome everyone. We're going to talk today about the idea of the actual employee experience. This is a live stream, which is meant to be that this is flexible. We're going to get your questions. You can put things in the comments. I've got Michelle on the HR executive team who's going to be helping to bring in some questions along the way that you share and submit. The more, the better. If in doubt, ask. That's a very good thing. We've got a bunch of those in advance, and we're going to go through those as well. So, Michelle, why don't we start with our first question today, and we'll dive right in. So what do we mean by the actual employee experience, and what is that? Well, it's a great question. You know, oftentimes when you see presentations at a conference or someone marketing something, talk about employee experience, it's things that I would sort of call like around the periphery, right? Be a bit like if you took a flight on an airline and we're talking about what the check-in desk looks like, or maybe what kind of drink they serve in the lounge. Those are like nice to have, but fundamentally you're buying time, a seat in a plane to get to and from, and that's the core of it. And most of our employee experience efforts are really on the periphery, right? It's the drinks in the lounge, and it's less on the flight. And what we want to focus on is that actual experience. Think of yourself. At the end of a long day, at the end of the day, you're probably going to sit down and have dinner. And that may be with, your spouse or someone that you live with, like a roommate or, a parent if you're younger in your career, maybe an aging parent if you're older, maybe your kids, maybe it's a friend you're talking to on the phone or texting with, messaging with, and they're going to probably ask you a question. How was work? It's a question we get all of the time. And the reality is that the things on the periphery, which is where the focus of employee experience is, typically don't affect the answer to that question. The actual employee experience is really the answer to how was work today? How's work in general? How's work going? And when you think about those things, the things on the periphery being maybe a volunteer day or a cool portal with some perks, you get a free Uber once a month, or there's kombucha in the break room, or there's something else, right? There's a portal with an employee directory. This is what we focus a lot of employee experience efforts around. But when you think about day-to-day, what affects work, it's who you're working with, what you're working on. Do you get feedback? Are you clear on the expectations? Are you given support? Are you having fun? Are you challenged when you do a good job? Do you get a proverbial pat on the back and a congratulations? Do you feel appreciated? Is the work meaningful? This is the core of the actual employee experience. How's work? If I work at a job and I'm not clear what my manager wants from me, or they're micromanaging me, or they're the opposite, totally aloof and distant, and we never speak, I probably am not going to have a great time at work. If I don't know my coworkers well, if we don't get along, if I don't feel that they're supportive or I don't support them, it's not a great day at work. And so that's what I mean by the actual employee experience. We're going to get into some specifics around what you can do to affect that, because that's the thing. When you talk about engagement, performance, and retention, those are the things that matter. People are not like, hey, why do you stay at this company? oh, I love that we, get this perk or we have this one day off. That's typically not why people will stay at your company. They're sort of nice to have. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do them, but they'll typically say, I love the people I work with. I've got a great manager. I'm challenged. I feel like I get to do meaningful work. This is all of the research and data that says that this is true. And yet our employee experience efforts focus on anything but. Michelle, let's go to the next question. Got some comments coming in, by the way, as well. And Sana, thank you for putting a comment in. Current employee experience efforts are focused on things that have less impact, right? So we've got into some of that. So you think about things that, can be controlled centrally, right? From a corporate headquarters, potentially. Everyone gets an iPhone, or, everyone has access to Slack or Teams or something, or, everyone gets a Herman Miller chair in the office. That we try to sort of standardize, almost like imagine being in the military where everyone sort of gets the same and it creates a consistent experience. That's goodness, right? That's nice. But again, we are not focusing on some of the more fundamental elements of the employee experience. And manager enablement and employee manager relationships and employee development and feedback and performance management and culture have all been things that have been really proven to move the needle on whether employees have a high ENPS. If you haven't heard of the term ENPS, it's Employer Net Promoter Score. It's one of those questions that says on a 0 to 10 scale, how likely are you to recommend working here to a friend or colleague? 10 being very likely and 0 being unlikely. To have a high ENPS score, it's not just the things that are on your recruiting page. They're the things that, again, employees would maybe brag about to their friends or family, or that they post on their wall or talk about, which again are so much rooted in the fundamentals. It's often we don't need to do a bunch of sexy new things. We need to do the essentials in the fundamentals really well. Back to that airplane and travel analogy. If you have clean, safe, and on-time service with professionalism, you're going to be a leading airline. You don't necessarily need to have push to order drink service at your seat or a lounge that has, lobster tails in it. Those can be nice to have, but if you get the fundamentals right, you're actually going to stand out. I mean, so many of us do business with companies. And part of the reason people like working with, using their Amazon Prime membership is it's reliable, it's consistent, it's not fancy. The interface isn't that pretty. The boxes are not that pretty or that special, but you sort of get what you need, which is a frictionless, consumer experience to buy something. You find what you want, good price, and it gets there reliably. That's the kind of fundamentals we want to bring back to the employee experience. Do people come into work every day? Are they utilized, right? If you're not utilized, you feel like your career is passing you by. Are people included? Are people challenged? Are people supported? Do people feel connected to other folks? And do they get praise and recognition? These are the fundamentals we're talking about. Michelle, let's go to the next question. So often HR thinks about the employee experience as the things we do for employees, but what's the part for employees to play? And this ties to some great questions we got in advance of this live stream that I'd love to get into. And, we often think in a very sort of top-down or hierarchical sort of model. And, that's, a model where, we think of what do we do from the center, from the C-suite, right? Or the HR executive leadership team, and how do we cascade that down to managers of managers, and then individual contributors in a very waterfall-like way. And a lot of people who work in software and technology have started to realize that sort of waterfall development isn't as effective. We're moving to agile, which has everyone play a part, and things are constantly recalibrated, and feedback happens really quickly, and changes are made really quickly, and everyone's involved. And so rather than just doing things to the employee, again, I know so many HR leaders that are frustrated because they'll roll out a new piece of software, or they'll roll out a new benefit, and then people don't use it, or employees don't thank HR for it, or the engagement scores don't go up, because it's all sort of in this sort of perk-like way. It's like, laying out different food in the lounge and hoping that people are like, oh, I love coming to this lounge now. Thank goodness you replaced the cheese sticks with the veggie platter. And that's literally the level. I mean, I remember a company I talked to a couple of years ago that their employees, when they got food delivered, they had a food truck come, and they didn't like the shrimp inside of the tacos, right? And they were in this sort of like quibbling little pissing match about shrimp tacos. Can you imagine how frustrating that would be to be in HR and to have spent the money and to do all that? and have that be the thing. And apparently they're pretty good tacos as well, objectively. And so that's where you're kind of missing the mark if you get into these sort of perks and benefits elements. Those can be fine to attract some talent, but it's often not what's going to keep the talent. So the idea is, how does the employee shape their experience? Diversity, equity, and inclusion is a huge priority for most organizations, but it also means that we're all coming from different walks of life. We're born in different places, have different demographics, see the world through different lens, have different configurations of our lives outside of work, maybe value different things. So what's going to look good for me might not look good for you in an employee experience, and might not look good across a group of hundreds or thousands of employees, a lot of different versions of an experience. I mean, imagine a new parent, that father, that mother that recently had a child, and what they want out of an employee experience, that moment may be different than when they joined the company out of undergrad or grad school, when they were really looking for maximum opportunities to go on every trip, be in every meeting. They may want a lot of stability and clarity in a period of having their first child or a newborn. Conversely, they may have that worked out and that's not what they want, and they'll need to advocate for that. You have someone, again, earlier in career, they want to meet a lot of people, try a lot of things. You have someone that's in a place where they're doing something else, maybe they're involved in their community, et cetera. It's going to vary for different people. And so that's why employees have to make their experience better. If I have a manager and I'm not having one-on-ones and I don't know where I stand with my manager, or I don't get good feedback, I could be upset about that as an employee and fill out surveys and hopefully wait for a task force to sort through the results, and poof, one day maybe it gets better. Or I could just set up a one-on-one with my manager and ask her or him for some meaningful feedback. I could be responsible for those things. If my schedule didn't work for me, instead of leaving my organization and flipping that little dreaded button on LinkedIn we all fear people flip that says I'm open to opportunities and the recruiters pile in, instead of that, an employee could say, hey, can I leave work at 4 o'clock on Tuesday so I can take my aunt to dialysis, or I can do this thing that I'm really interested in and I'll make up the time. This is the level of empowerment we need to generate within employees, in my opinion, so they can shape and localize an employee experience that doesn't sacrifice the performance or regulations or rules of your company, but lets them make sometimes the smallest adjustments. I can tell you, I know that Tuesday leaving at 4 o'clock story is a real one that I know. And that would be the difference between a crappy employee experience and a great employee experience for that person. One simple thing, a little bit of flexibility in their schedules. We have people on the pilot team. We're a 100% remote team. We were remote first, and people need some flexibility. You got kids coming off the bus in the middle of the afternoon, where for safety reasons, the driver needs to see the parent to let the kid off the bus. Pretty important, right? So that's an important thing, that we allow employees to have that flexibility to say, hey, I've got a kid. You may not have a kid. I need to be this 30-minute window. I'm not going to be able to be on Zoom. I got to be at the street corner picking up my kid. But that's what creates a good employee experience for them, is they can be successful in their role at home as a parent and successful in their role at work. For other people, they may be bored to tears. They may be isolated, right? They've been working from home and all they want to do is be around people, and them advocating to take a business trip or meet somebody for dinner or to do all that in safe and smart ways may be the difference that really makes the difference for them. And so this is where we need to have employees not only, voice like they do maybe in an anonymous survey, but really in their own voice, in their first person voice, to their managers and to themselves, start shaping and honing the employee experience that they actually want. Michelle, let's go to the next question. What role do managers play? Boy, do managers play a great part in the employee experience. And yet most employee experience committees do not have first line managers in there, or they're not even really accounted. And if they are, they're just a distribution vehicle. It's like handing someone a bunch of flyers to hand out in a street corner, and you just have them do something like that, versus really realizing that managers or like community leaders that are going to shape this employee experience. And when we think about managers, sometimes we think about them, holding employees accountable and good performance management, but managers are these sort of mini culture curators, right? Imagine throwing a dinner party at your house for 5 or 6 friends, or some neighbors. You create an environment. Now, you're not running a restaurant, right? You're not throwing dinner parties for the whole country or the whole neighborhood even. But in your little corner of the world, you shape an environment. You can create connection. You can have fun. But it takes some work and to be thoughtful. We need managers to be these hosts of the employee experience, not just, blindly saluting whatever memo they're getting or whatever Slack they're getting or whatever workflow they're getting from on high, but to think, hey, for my team, knowing what I know about them, right? You may have a team, if you run a customer success team right now and, they may be exhausted from all the people sitting at home doing customer service and buying things. You may have a sales team that has been bruised by the pandemic and slowed sales in certain industries. You may have an engineering team that's lost a lot of talent. That's where each manager needs to think about the employee experience, not just generally, but right now, because the context will continue to change. Managers have the best information about their teams and their employees. Now, each employee knows themselves best, but the managers know the structure and the whole the best. And so in addition to kind of training up managers on, real fundamentals of company policies and, really important things around DEI, et cetera, we also need to think about managers not just sort of doling out work and assignments and holding people accountable in a performance management system. We need to think about managers in a way that's really shaping and helping employees shape an employee experience where they're wildly happy to work at a company. When a recruiter would ask them, what would it take for you to leave? For them to scratch their head and say, I don't know, I'm really happy here. It really makes sense to me, right? When they realize their best career opportunities and prospects are right in the job they have and for the manager that they're with. And if not, they can talk about that internally and where they might want to go. That's the difference that the manager can make in those roles. All right, Michelle, let's go to our next question. How does learning and development, L&D, we love L&D. How does it factor into the employee experience strategy? Well, sort of, old school L&D, and a lot of people in L&D are innovating. So there's a lot of thought leaders in this space, but kind of our traditional L&D does the basics, right? They have compliance training and sexual harassment training and certain safety training. And it's like the basics, right? And then we think about onboarding, or we think about certain things tied to maybe promotions or certain competencies that may be technical in nature. People may need certifications to do particular jobs or licensing. Super important work, all of that. But L&D also needs to start skilling up employees and managers alike to shape their employee experience. If you're hybrid or you're remote now and you're working from home, you're probably on the same tools as every other employer is providing. You're on Teams or Slack or Zoom, you're in Outlook 365 or you're in G Suite. These tools have become commodities, right? In a lot of ways, it's similar to other companies. So that's not going to be enough, right? Everyone's going to have a Dell or an Apple laptop or something like that, and good cloud technology. And if not, they're quickly catching up to do that. But then what? So this is where L&D can really play a key role in enabling managers and employees alike in providing them development opportunities, structured development opportunities where they see not just a way to succeed in their job, right? Not just a way to meet expectations or exceed them on the performance of their job, but in sort of tapping into the potential of themselves. Talent management, we often have a 9 box, which is a x-axis of performance and a y-axis of potential. And we put, employees and we assess them in these 9 boxes. The vast majority of our efforts are all on that performance axis. How do we get more out of the individual for them to deliver or perform? Talent management generally is 90% assess, 10% development. That's been kind of the fallacy of it. But the real opportunities on that potential axis. How does L&D help managers and employees alike tap into their unfilled potential? How does every employee, how do we set a metric or a mindset of people becoming the best version of themselves? Not someone who they're not, but all of us have an opportunity to be a better version of what we already are, to tap into our strengths and to modulate them and to address some gaps, things we may not know or be aware of, to challenge ourselves. That's where L&D can play a key role in helping to shape that employee experience. Again, well beyond just performing in a job, but really tapping into the potential of the individual. All right, Michelle, so how should we think about employee experience in the context of hybrid and remote work? Well, here's a thing that I said last week that really shocked an author I was speaking to. I said, being successful as an employee in remote or hybrid work is harder. Now, I believe in remote and hybrid work. I founded a remote first company. We got people all over the country and the world working for Pilot from all walks of life. We tap into a better talent pool, a more diverse talent pool, and we create a better employee experience, in my opinion, by doing that. Here's the trade-off, though. It requires employees to be more self-managed, to be more communicative, to be more self-directed, to be more confident, to advocate for themselves. The bar to perform actually gets higher. If we're all co-located in an area, the employee experience involves me maybe as the manager seeing someone working late and then I can ask if they're struggling, or seeing someone that maybe seems a little bit unmotivated or down, I can see if they're okay. Or if someone has a question, they can, roll their chair over to my desk or stop by my office. If we want to have a feedback conversation, we can go get a coffee in the break room really quickly or go to the cafeteria. There's a lot of structure, right? If I'm, unmotivated in a given day, I got to get dressed, get up, commute, get to the office, and I'm kind of around this structure to perform. Much more hard when you're at home with a lot of distractions, maybe not the best work conditions or environment. Really challenging for the employee to say, how do I keep my head in the game here? How do I push status and let people know? When people join Pilot, one of the big transitions that they have doing 100% remote is they realize that the bar for communication is so much higher. Like they need to push status all the time. I got the message. I'm working on it. Here's where it stands, because we're all working in these sort of, chambers of silence. And even though we've got great collaboration tools, it also requires, people having fewer meetings. That's a big thing that people learned in the pandemic. While productivity was generally maintained, employees worked on average 2 hours more a day for the same output. So we actually became inefficient in the pandemic in these models. And that's because we weren't, reducing meetings. Meetings are a huge killer of productivity. Asana estimates for knowledge workers that 60% of people's day is spent doing work about work, not work itself, but the work about work, the status meetings, the reports, etc., which really robs us of the performance and the growth and the satisfaction. Because work about work doesn't usually result at the end of the day at the dinner table of saying, how was work? And I said, well, I had a bunch of status meetings to tell people that things were happening, but I didn't get much done. That's not a great day at work. Saying, hey, we sketched out a new wireframe for the product, or I talked to new sales prospects, or I had a great feedback conversation with my manager. That's real work. That's not work about work. And so again, big difference in remote and hybrid work. One of the things that everyone's worried about right now with the Delta variant, it's very complex, vaccine mandates, how to get people back to the office, distancing, masking, testing. There's a lot to figure out. And I have a lot of empathy for HR folks, but we have to look above the horizon, over the hill. After we figure that out, which is going to take a lot of work, and I don't, discount any of that. But then what? How do we have, once people have VPN and a Teams account and in Slack or whatever they have, they need Dropbox or G Suite or Box, whatever they got. They have Salesforce, all these great tools. And then they have a set schedule. They go to the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they're hybrid Monday, Friday. But then what? How do they, on those days, make it productive? How do they stay connected with their teams? I was rereading a book recently, Crucial Conversations. They mentioned that virtual teams can have 3 times the amount of conflict. And doesn't mean don't do virtual, but it means you have to skill up the employees to be able to manage it, to have the EQ, to have those crucial conversations and be able to navigate that dynamically. Got Amy from our team, by the way, in the chat. She's added some great questions. Check those out. Keep the questions coming in. We'll have more time for them as we go. And then, Amy just added, being able to be the best version of yourself at work truly does allow you to give your best as well. And that's a great point. Amy leads our product strategy at the company and works frontline with these employees and managers on their own employee experience. And when people, there's a lot of things you can't do in HR. You can't necessarily change the product or service the company is selling, right? Or maybe the structure or the strategy or the financing things or some of the leadership. But, that day-to-day sense of, if I work here, I'm getting better. I'm better for being here. I'm better for being around these people, leveraging these processes, being in these relationships, having these tools. That's what, when I think back to those experiences in my career where they sort of like made it for me, where I was really shaped, they were often those experiences that weren't necessarily, I didn't have the best desk chair. We didn't have kombucha fountains. We didn't have a volunteer day necessarily, but there were ones in which I was learning and I felt supported and I felt close to my managers, people that, a decade later, we text message back and forth about all sorts of things because we developed close personal relationships and a very effective way of working. Let's go to our next question. In a tight labor market, how can a unique employee experience set organizations apart? Well, it's a great question because every organization that I know, every organization across the nation is, red on their hiring right now. Everyone's struggling to hire. So they're really freaked out about retaining, and it ties to both. A good employee experience, if you rethink it, will help you both attract bunch of great people in the recruiting process because you're going to have something different to sell them. And you won't just be competing on salary or benefits or time off, which again, sometimes a venture-backed or recently IPO'd or SPAC'd tech company is going to outbid a lot of other organizations. So how do you compete in recruiting with that? Well, you say, hey, sometimes the people that pay the most have the worst employee experiences. We have a great one. Here's why people love working here. Here's why it makes sense to so many people here. Here's why we maybe win these awards or have high retention or grow leaders through the ranks. And so as you think about both retaining and attracting, on the retention side, the last thing you want to do in a tight labor market is have more people go out the door, right? Imagine if you were a business trying to get new subscribers or customers, but then you lost 10 or 20% of them every year, right? That's a big deficit to fill before you have any net growth. So if you've got recruiting targets that include growing your organization, recruiting actually should be in front of those targets. I mean, retention should be in front of those targets because you got to make sure you keep those people stable and solid, especially because when you hire someone new, they don't always work out, right? The time to competency, often the break even on new hires is 6 months. That we're losing money on those people for 6 months. So all the more important to get 6 more months out of existing talent, or 12 or 24, because they already know the culture, the processes, they're trained, they're up to speed, they have relationships. Imagine you ask someone, in their second week to get something done versus someone in their second year. The person in their second year is just going to get it done. The second week is going to take a lot. It's a learning curve. So we've got to retain people through an employee experience that leans into the moment. What people wanted in August of 2019 is different than what they want today. The goalposts have moved. People have had life-changing awakenings in the last year and a half, some of it through tragedy and some of it through strife and struggle. But a lot of people want some different things, and that may be more flexibility in their work schedule. It may be that they are tired of kind of coasting, or they want to feel more connected, or they want to work on something more current. You got to start to ask employees what that is. They may not know. And the easiest thing for an employee to do is declare job bankruptcy, emotional bankruptcy. You know what? I'm over it. I need a change. I want something different. They won't even know what those things are, but any change they'll think is better, rather than getting them to articulate what they'd like right here and right now. Sort of what in an exit interview, you often ask, is there anything we could have done to have you stay? Well, wouldn't that be better to get in front of before someone gets an offer somewhere else? We've all been on our back foot in those positions. Do you counter? Do you not? Even if you do, they often don't accept, or if they do, they only stay a little bit longer. We've got to get in front of it to help with this, which of course, if we get it right for the current employees, it's going to certainly get it right for future ones we're trying to recruit. So we got Maria put a great comment: ensuring that we're supporting your employees to ensure the best employee experience is not only imperfect, but impactful, but measurable, right? And this is a key thing, that this is a measurable thing. This isn't just a squishy thing. It's a very important, because we can look at engagement, performance, retention, manager sentiment, intent to stay at the company. These are all measurable things. In the pilot product, we measure these. Your company, you're measuring these with surveys and your HRIS systems, et cetera. So there's real tangible business impact when we do those. Let's go to the next question. Now I'm going to mention real quick before I get into this question, I'm going to stay on after we said 30 minutes, but I'll be here for a few more questions. And we're really excited to have those keep coming in. So keep bringing those questions in. The question is, how do you handle companies that don't have infrastructure in place to create meaningful and sustainable action plans from employee experience feedback along the way? It's a great question. Some companies, the Fortune 1000, are going to have maybe big teams or big resources, but many companies that we work with don't have that infrastructure. Part of that is to make sure that the employees are not just giving feedback, right? But they're also seeing a part for them to play. Part of it is when they give the feedback, right? You say, hey, well, what could you do right now to turn that from a dissatisfaction to a satisfaction? How could we do something this week together, right? You start to think much more incrementally and more in a more sort of scrappy way. And, and that's just a key thing that, you want to think about is, this general idea of scrappy entrepreneurial, things. Because if an employee is like, oh, I'm going to give some feedback in a survey, and then a committee's going to work on it, and then they're going to buy something, you're going to roll it out 18 months later, that's 18 months worth of how was work that doesn't change in the eyes of the employee. But if you did something much smaller, this work, How was work? Well, I mentioned something and my boss challenged me with this, or I was offered to do that, or HR suggested this, or I decided to try this instead and it worked, or I learned something, or it feels like we're making progress. That's the change that you can make right now. So part of it is, don't design an employee experience approach that requires tons of employee feedback and requires a bunch of management committees to implement it if you don't have those. You got to kind of say as a constraint, right? Necessity is the mother of invention. The constraint is we don't have those things. We're probably not going to have those things at our organization. So what do we do to empower it to be done more localized, right? Oftentimes it's called site-based management and management thinking 20 years ago. That was like, what do we do on that team or for that individual in that role to have them see that there's something that they could do right now, that maybe the organization isn't in a place to make a bunch of changes, but that individual and that manager could. It may just be that they want more accolades and say, hey, I get a lot of great critical development feedback, but I would be really wonderful to know when I do a good job and just to be told that was awesome. I appreciate it. Sometimes that's, for a lot of employees, they say they want feedback. There's 3 types of feedback. There's certainly critical developmental feedback, but then there's acknowledgement and praise. And then there's confirmation of status. Are we on the same page? Are we tracking? So you want to dig into it, because often we go to the critical developmental. What they really want is the acknowledgement. And that's where we have to be more specific, that sometimes the tools, the employee listening and the survey tools are just, an inch deep. We don't really get to the nuance to say, I want more feedback. What would that look like to you? Or what difference might that need? What difference might that make to you? Looks like we have another comment from Amy here in the chat that from our product team that says, we see real data that shows employees that spend time on themselves and put their development experience into their priorities say they feel more connected and engaged in their day-to-day work. So again, our data is showing this. This is data that a lot of other companies and thought leaders and researchers are finding, that the employees, obviously, it's no different than if employees trying to quit smoking or lose weight or do anything else to make a positive behavior change, save money for their retirement, get better sleep, manage their mental health, drink less, etc. That when they put the work in, there's nothing, our wellness programs, there's nothing we can do from a cascading top-down perspective to help employees get more steps in their day or more sleep in their night or a better diet, right? Now, we can influence, we can create awareness, but it's really the employee that's going to make the choice of how often they move and how they get to and from work. They're making the choice of, when they go to bed and how they manage their schedule. They're making the choice of what they're going to eat. And so we can enable, right? But they have to follow through and turn what they know into what they do. And that's where, again, that L&D part is so key to help employees with behavior change support, with habit setting, with goal setting, with mindset. And that's such a key thing, because ultimately when you feel, people in your life, you have friends or family or colleagues, that person that's kind of like stuck and they're just, everything is an excuse and they're just negative, and you love them and you care for them, but they're sort of in their own way because they kind of have this can't do attitude where there's just a lot of reasons or excuses behind everything. That's a tough thing, because there's nothing that HR or management is going to be able to do for that employee. It'll never be sufficient. They will never be happy. So the key is you have to shake them a bit and support them into taking their own actions and experimenting with their own things. People will often be sick of meetings at work, and I say, well, why do you accept every meeting invite? Do you clarify if you have a role to play, if you need to be there, if you need to be there the whole time, if it even needs to be a meeting? These are things, meetings are one of the employees' least favorite things at work. And yet employees sort of blindly just accept and attend meetings rather than asserting themselves, rather than thinking critically about that. And again, it's a small thing that can make a big difference. Even being more prepared, employees will say, hey, our staff meetings are disorganized, don't feel like they're a good use of time. Okay, how could you help employee in that? Can you help us have an agenda? Could you help us facilitate? Could you help us anything? This is where it's not just on our managers. Everyone has a critical part to play in shaping the employee experience. And again, this is why at Pilot, we're so passionate about the employee experience. And we're passionate about employees and managers alike taking greater ownership in shaping that and really hitting the fundamentals, because all the nice to haves in the world, you can take your whole team on a trip to, a Caribbean island, and you can do these things, these sort of perks. And they can be nice, and people will love that trip, the week of the trip and a couple weeks before and a week after. And then the other 48 weeks of the year, what are you doing? How are people answering how's work at dinner every night? How are they thinking about it in their career? And that's where a more incremental and continuous approach. If any of you are into houseplants, there's been a huge boom in houseplants and gardening in the pandemic. You think about this great metaphor, right? You're trying to cultivate and you're growing, but you don't grow plants in a day. And sometimes you can put too much effort. You overwater a plant, you kill it, right? And you got to experiment and you learn and how much sun they need. And, oh, you got to fertilize. Oh, you forgot that part. Okay, great. And you do all these things. This is our employee experience efforts. We are cultivating something incrementally and consistently. If you have an employee experience task force that makes a plan and kicks something off at the beginning of the year and then that's it, well, you don't have the sort of dynamic, consistent thing. You just say, hey, we have kombucha fountains and a volunteer day and iPhones. We're done. Well, that's fine, but that's, again, the basics. That's joining the military and getting a camo uniform. Great, congrats. That's the start, not the end. And so, again, we want to think about these efforts over the long term. So, I know we're at time here. We're going to get wrapped up. I'm available on LinkedIn. Would love to connect with anyone in the HR community. I'm Ben Brooks, NY, on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. You can find me at all over. And Pilot, we're at www.pilot.coach. Would love to support any of you in your employee experience efforts. Thanks again to ADP, the sponsor of both today's live stream, as well as two others that have been held with Steve Buis and Jason Averbach, as well as a really fantastic white paper on these topics. They're certainly investing in the thought leadership and the products and services around pioneering the future of work. And of course, to HR Executive Magazine, a great partner of ours and mine, thought leaders truly in the space, advocating for HR success. So again, would love to stay connected with you online. Let's connect on LinkedIn today. And if we can help you out, give us a shout at pilot.coach, our website. Thanks everyone again for joining and have a great week. Cheers.